All right, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing time so far. Our next speaker is Serg Masís. He is a climate and agronomic data scientist at Syngenta. Please join me in welcoming him to our virtual stage.
Hi, Patrica. Thanks for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, thank you everybody for joining. I'm glad to be here. Patrica did a great introduction. Yes, my name is Serg Masís. Serg is actually my English nickname. You could call me Sergio if you speak Spanish. I wrote a best-selling book for PACT. That's a comprehensive hands-on overview of interpretable machine learning, also known as XAI, which should explain why I'm speaking about that right now. I use it a lot in my work, and this is an example of what I do. I also have prior career in web development, but we can skip over all of that since we've already done a great introduction. Okay, so before we begin, I'll give a quick introduction to phenological models. I'm guessing there's a lot of people in the audience that are not familiar with this particular use case for machine learning. So basically, when plants grow, whether they're wheat, soybean, corn, or something else, they go through various distinct phases. Plant phenology is measuring the timings of these stages by measuring the difference in days between them. And so you have to ask, why does this matter? Farmers need to know the schedule of plant development to decide when to apply fertilizers and pesticides and when to plant to avoid frost, pests, diseases, and other threats. In other words, preventative and protective agricultural activities. Now, with climate change, it has become increasingly difficult to predict. Therefore, farmers can no longer rely on, farmers' almanacs written many months in advance, or simple heuristics passed down by generations. As much as the landmass of the planet is covered by crops, it also impacts ecosystems, weather systems, and sustainability on a global scale. So traditionally, phenological models are based on formulas like this one and this other one. Some of these are more complicated and some more simple. They also include coefficients drawn by linear regression or some heuristics like averages observed for different varieties of a plant and so on. Typically, common predictors have to do with temperature and moisture, as you saw in those previous slides. You see the T everywhere. That stands for temperature, which are two things we know the plant needs to grow. But temperature is actually related to other things like daylight received and corresponding radiation from the sun. Likewise, we know that precipitation and evapotranspiration, humidity, and a few other variables are related to moisture. There's also the genetics of the plant that play a role. The crop variety is a factor because it might grow slower or faster or be more resilient to certain weather and other risks based on variety. And of course, there's some things that are completely up to the farmer, like if they use fertilizer and how much and what kind and the seed density and the planting depth and a lot of other things. So here we have a problem statement. It's a fairly simple one, when we go down up to the, end result of it. We have weather data is plentiful and reliable, but observations of plant growth are hard to come by and prone to data quality issues, because these are typically gathered by trialists on the field or the farmers themselves and entered manually. All variables are highly correlated among each other. This is expected as weather is and the way it interacts with the soil and everything is highly correlated. Domain experts such as agronomists, agrogeneticists, agrochemists, entomologists have a long tradition of using simple models to predict plant growth. But traditional phenological models aren't very accurate. They're like about 2 weeks off on average. In some cases, it might be less. It might be like, less than a week, more or less a week. But in the best, even 3 weeks in the worst case scenario. Uh, the idea is to make accurate and explainable ML models to satisfy, both the need from the business of more accurate models, but also from agronomists and farmers to, get to know what's going on. Um, so now we discuss how to interpret and tune machine learning models for phenology. So first, let's look at the data. And here you can see, imagine each line represents an individual plot of land. What we use typically, there's a lot of ways of different taxonomies to discuss, or models to discuss the plant growth stages. But we use a decimal one called BBCH, which represents stages as numbers from 0 to 99, discrete numbers. It's not continuous or even linear, so it's not being meant to be represented like this. That is, as an interpolated lines, but this is just to show more or less how it grows. And of course, the red line in the center is like an average, right? So the easiest way to look at it is as time series. So we're gonna first discuss, making a time series LSTM model, which stands for long short-term memory model. And these are very popular in time series, and they can be used in multivariate cases as this one is. So like imagine this. Imagine we have, like 14 days to the past. And here we're going to do a simple example. It's a lot more than that, of like, what it takes to go from BBCH 0, which is planting, to BBCH 10, which is emergence. That is when the plant is above the ground. It's no longer a seed underneath, but you can already see it, right? So how long in days does that take? That's the Y, that's the labels. And the X is the weather 14 days before planting and 7 days after planting. But of course, that's forecasted weather. So 7 days of forecast and 14 days of historical data. That's what we're trying to use to predict this. And so uh, once we train a model like that with this data, we can interpret it using integrated gradients. And typically, you've seen integrated gradients before on examples like this, like image-based ones, and of course NLP. And that's a sentiment analysis example. But you have integrated gradients is pretty good on you know figuring out what a deep learning model sees. In other words, what it is finding important, either to make one prediction or another. And so you can leverage integrated gradients for this time series problem. And what you find is something like this. This is an attribution map. And well, it's very similar to what you would see there, except it applies, every pixel here is not really a pixel. It represents the combination between um, a different time step and a variable. So you can look at it's all relative to whatever value these have, but it's telling you that there's something important. If it's not like the neutral color of 0 that represents 0, it's telling you what's important for that particular cross section. And so you can examine these on a local level. In other words, for each individual prediction. But you can also take your test data and make an average. You can make an average of all the different attribution maps and put them together and figure out exactly what's going on average. And that's very useful, because then you can start taking cross sections of it. Like you can take, what is the ones that are highly misclassified, like for instance, have an MAE of, I don't know, 5 or 6 days. What's the deal with those? And the ones that are very accurate, what's the deal with those? And the ones that are, shorter term predictions, in other words, they're predicting, like something that this is going to happen, like, I don't know, 15 days in the future versus those that are predicting 30 days of the future. What's the difference between those? So here I'm just taking one that's a general average, but you can make, and we've done this like many different averages, just to see what's going on in different cases. So with that in mind, you also can connect it to the values. I said it's important to connect it to the values. So we look at these averages, the part that are a deep purple, you can connect those with these values over here, right? So that's very useful for doing all kinds of correlations. Of course, visually and understanding how the values connect with the saliency in the model. And so you can come up with all kinds of hypotheses and you can test them. And for that, we take a step back. We no longer use time series models. We move on to tabular. And something you can do with tabular is we can start taking these things and turning them into features. So we create features that count extremes, like unusually hot days, unusually dry days, etc., capture large variances, big temperature swings, aggregate summary stats like mean, min, max, sum, etc., over relevant time series windows. And by what I mean about that is when you look at this, you see what time windows matter. And so we see, okay, seems to be like the last week doesn't matter, but the last 14 days or the week before that does. So you can start looking at things like that. So the process that we go with tabular is very simple. Well, it's not very simple, but I can simplify it here. We take the feature selection over a dozen feature selection methods, each one creating a different feature set. We hyperparameter tune with different gradient boosted decision trees, Bayesian hyperparameter tuning on each feature set. And then we do a model selection process, which selects the best model based on predictive performance and consistency. And then we interpret the model, the best model, and see if we find something we can fine tune. So that's the way it goes and goes around and around. Once we interpret this, we end up finding out, oh, like there's a lot we can do here, like with this. And this is an example of the one of the final models that was determined for the 0 to 10, from planting to emergence interval. But there's a lot of things that can be done while we go. And so this is an example of what we find. For those that are familiar to SHAP can be used to understand feature importance. And as you see here, all the most important feature is at the top. And as you go down, you get to least important features. And it also can give you somewhat of an understanding of what values influence either negative or positively the model output. And so that's something that also can inform your decisions. If you want to look at that understanding of what values matter, you can go and do what is called a partial dependence plot. And here you see the partial dependence plot for one value, and you see the interaction with another one. Incidentally, if we want to look at interactions, we can also see them with the SHAP interaction values, which is something I'm not going to get into in this session, but something we also do. So I'm going to wrap this up, but at the end of all this process, once we've understood, all these features and how they relate to each other and what matters most, the idea is to, make a very sparse model that just captures what it needs and can make the most out of it. And so finally, what we get to is a model that, in every instance that we work with, outperforms the LSTM model, outperforms even, of course, it's going to outperform the mechanistic model, the original models, the agronomist, the traditional phenological models. But it blows my mind how good they compare. Of course, this is not always the case. Going from planting to emergence is relatively easy because it's, you plant something and it's like less than a month away. But even for intervals, even we had to go from planting to a harvest, which might be 300 days away. It still, does it for less than 2 weeks. It's less than 2 weeks off, which is very good. Comparatively, another model might take, like 3 weeks or a month, like 3 weeks or a month off. So like it's all very relative to where you are in the entire timeline, but the predictive performance is really good. Lastly, we also have explainable outcomes, and whether it's through Lime, SHAP, PDPs, or we convert our things to anchors and counterfactuals, we can explain our outcomes. So that ends my session, and thank you, and hope to get your questions. Bye.
Wow, thank you so much. That was amazing. And I know this virtual audience learned a lot and is going crazy with virtual applause. We really appreciate you sharing with us today. And for the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.